Welcome to Notepad. I'm your host Ibrahim Sani. As we continue the conversation of restarting Malaysia, we have to acknowledge that some of us are more ready than most in terms of returning back into the workplace, restarting back the economy and the likes. One particular company or research company, Ipsos, has done a particular study that talks about this at length. They argue that Malaysia is behind in terms of readiness when we want to talk about restarting our economy, restarting our communities to come back from the lockdown of the various names of the various versions of COVID-19. And in this, they also argue the methodology in terms of arriving at such conclusions, much of which needs to be discussed. So joining me is Arun Menon, the MD of Ipsos Malaysia. Arun, thanks again for taking the time to speak with us.
Hi Ibrahim. Good to be back.
Let's go through the purpose and the reason behind producing such a report before we start to dig deep into the details of it.
Okay, so this time what we have done is that, all of us has gone through MCO and CMCO, and, now we are moving to RMCO as such. We also noticed that it is not the COVID-19, the pandemic is not specific to Malaysia. It has affected the whole world and all our regions as well, right? Even if we look at our Southeast Asia, our neighbours across Malaysia, each of these countries has been adapting, or their strategies of addressing COVID-19 and the post-economic situation is very different from each other, right? So what we wanted to know is that what is the consumers or the general public opinion in each of this market. So this time we covered Malaysia and all our 6 major economies around Malaysia, what we call the ASEAN. Within the ASEAN, the 6 major economies, we wanted to see how people are behaving within this region in itself, right? So we had a bigger scope to understand how people are behaving with COVID-19 and the recovery phase.
So what would be some of the things that you guys measured before arriving at the conclusions?
So one of the things that we would want to know definitely is that what stage are we? COVID-19 as such has a social, economical impact, and as well as psychological impact on each and every one of us, right? So we wanted to understand, first of all, what stage are we when it comes to COVID-19, and within each of the countries, how does this stage differ? So that's one of our areas that we are focusing on. And along with that, we also understand that the other difference is the different categories or different areas that we engage. Some of us are more comfortable going for social gatherings, some of us more comfortable going for restaurant. How does this interaction, the social interactions, or coming back to the economy in itself, how does it differ by different countries? So there's 2 major factors that we focused on.
Okay, and let's talk about the findings then. In this particular chart that you shared with the press, there's 6 stages, of which China, you guys presume to be at stage 6. The rest of the other Southeast Asian countries are at stage 4, and Malaysia is slightly lagging at stage 3. What are the different stages, and why are we at stage 3 as opposed to the other guys, and why are they in fact in stage 4 and stage 6?
Okay. So we put actually Vietnam there. It's Vietnam and the other countries in the region, right? So China, as you said, is already on stage, stage 6, and they have already post the COVID-19. And so we had a window between China and others to understand the psychological phases what people goes through. So if we putting China at the end, where is the pandemic is behind us and we have gone beyond the pandemic, that is one. But now what is the other stages? So when our behavioral science people try to understand people, they know that the first stage is what we call as awareness stage. And then we go to different stages. We are being aware of the situation. situation, we are acclimatizing the situation as such. Then there is a stage of we are adapting and adjusting to the situation. At the last will what we call endurance, right? So we all go through at the last phase of MCO. When is this going to open up? We need to go up. Some of my friends said that they want to go for a jog really desperately. So that's each stages, right, that people goes through. So we put in different stages as per what we have observed in China, and then replicate and try to understand how does each market in the region behave on it. As you said, in each of the countries that we covered in Southeast Asia, you would notice that the pandemic is in different stages. There are more cases of infection in the countries like Indonesia, in Singapore and Philippines, whereas in Vietnam starts with very low infection, zero death rate as reported, and they're much on the top. So as we saw in the survey as well, the Vietnamese consider that they are beyond the pandemic now. Most of the functions are open. But interestingly so, as you mentioned, that Malaysia seems to be at the stage where we are reacting it to on a day-to-day basis, whereas in some of the Southeast Asia countries has said that no, we are already adapted to that in itself, right? So this is also quite interesting to us, right? We do have less cases of infection, and some of these countries seems to have more cases of infection, but they are saying that no, we're already adjusted to it, or whereas in Malaysia said we are reacting to it stage by stage. So that was an interesting insight for us in terms of that. What we also notice is that in Malaysia we have different phases. We have an MCO, there are certain part, there is an enhanced MCO, then we have CMCO, now we have RMCO. So each stage we have different social, there is an SOP definitely which is binding, but also the relaxation is stage by stage. So that's probably the reason compared to some of the countries in the region where they have a full lockdown or no lockdown. So it's a much more easy from going.
The thing
from
that you mentioned, within Malaysia there are very different stages. It also shows a very subjective approach to it, and when you want to measure things like this, research, it's very hard to identify, although people like you would be very, very familiar with quantifying subjective emotive feelings. I understand that. Yeah. But the question now is, how do you make a science into the readiness or the level of acceptance of the situation, and then matrix it or put it into a matrix like the way you did right now?
Yes, it definitely challenging as such. What we also notice along with that when we observed is because as every country and economy, they should be moving forward to the next stage. Now the pandemic is actually contained to an extent in a wider part of some of the part of the world in itself, but now the focus has moved to economy, and where it's a reversed approach where we would expect consumers and general public to be back in society and back in terms of the spending mode in general as such. So we have noticed a slightly different as you said, when you mentioned about metrics per se, we have looked into different demographics and profile of people going through each stage, and we have seen slightly different reactions to it from different some consumer segments. We believe that our B40 segment seems to be the most affected by the pandemic at this point, like economically, and we also need from a psychological angle as well. They've been quite impacted by the pandemic, followed by the M40 and T20 as well. When it comes to T20, most of them say that they have already adapted or adjusted to it, right? One of our hypotheses was that the younger people are probably more easily adapting to the older people because the technology, but this kind of proved us wrong. The older you are, they seems to move faster in terms of adapting into this kind of situation, probably because of their experience as such, right? So when we have the 18 to 24, 24 to 35, they seems to be more in the situation I'm reacting on a day-to-day basis. Whereas in some of the older segment, I'm already I need to move to the next stage already. So when you are looking at stage 4, I have already adapted. We see a bit more older segment of people.
Arun, I just want to understand a little bit better. Is there anything wrong by being reactive, or is being reactive something that we need to work on? What would be, I guess, the negative connotation that can arise when you say the young guys are becoming reactive, Malaysians are becoming reactive? Is it a bad thing?
So it is because, as you said, there is nothing wrong with that. It gives us an indication of how fast countries can be back to normalcy, right? So as in the sense that ideally we would want to the stage where Vietnam is, whereas pandemic is behind us, let me go ahead with my day-to-day activities, right? So if I am and I'm we are an organization with 450 people at Ipsos as such, right? I would want the business to resume back to the normal stage, right? And that's where I would say that, okay, I have adapted to certain norms or SOPs of working, and I'm now started contributing to the business the way I can be, right? But if I am in the mode of like I'm reacting on a day-to-day situation, it's a lot more challenging for the businesses to, for example, from an employee perspective, it's quite difficult for them to manage. But now, if I look at the economy perspective as well, we would want the business to use probably public transportation, and we would touch upon it right now. So people should be more comfortable using public transportation. People should be more comfortable going out to a restaurant to eat as we can, right? And if I am on the previous stage, we psychologically we see there is still a bit of stigma attached to it. They are not comfortable moving to going out and starting engaging with the public in itself, right? So that's where say we see that it might have an economic impact as we move forward, right? So yeah, so that's where our reference to it. As fast as possible, we would want consumers to progress through these stages.
Much of the analysts that I speak to when it comes to COVID-19 recovery, they tend to highlight some of the sectors that might not return back to normal. In fact, some are even arguing that there is a permanent damage that is going to be done. Some of them are, of course, in the travel industry, in the leisure industry. Hotels are never going to look the same ever again, some hotels at least. That is from the, I guess, economic calculation of it. What is interesting in your report, in Ipsos's report, is this particular slide, and if I can pull this up right now, this slide, if you can see here, it shows that the negative perception from the consumer end perspective, people like me, people like you, using public transportation, not in 2020. Joining a cultural event, I guess this is where the concerts and all the other stuff that is there. Not going to happen in 2020. Gym, sports facility, gone. Travel, domestic travel, gone. International travel, gone. They're gone. How do you come back from this? Very recently, we heard an interview of a logistics player, port authority player. They're saying if consumption is not going to go up, forget it. This country's economy is not going to see that kind of recovery that we want it to be seen. How do you marry that kind of fear versus consumption of consumers?
I think, Ibrahim, the expectation of all of us, right, including me, all those people who are in the business, is that as much as possible, we want it to be what we call a V curve, right? As in the sense, we need to bounce back as much as possible. So when we spoke to the businesses and business leaders in Malaysia, it's a different survey in itself. In May, everyone expected by end of May, because now we are in CMCO phases, that business will come back to normal. People, and then we have Hari Raya and everything, and it's going to boost us back, right? But apparently that did not happen. And now we are increasingly looking at much slower recovery than what we expected, right? So going in March, and I think, Ibrahim, in one of your session, you shared one of the Ipsos data, right? 68% of Malaysians expected by June, everything will be back to normal. And this was in one of the last that was a survey that we did in March, right? Just the first phase of March in itself. Now when we are in June, 68% is long gone, which is, we are like, no, it's not going to be happening at all, right? So it's the same group of audience in March, the consumer saying that by June we are going to be open, right? Now when we are in June, the people are saying, no, we are nowhere ready to come back to business as such. So this is what is happening, and it is now affecting, as you rightly said, on some of the industries and sectors. And the most affected definitely is travel. Now, forget another country, there is, the logistical restriction and the opening of the borders and stuff. But even travel domestically, and something interesting in Malaysia, public transportation, 44% are saying that they will not be using in 2020, right? So this is, I know that there are some in the recovery measures by the government, there have been some announcement on from the Prasarana side or to encourage people to use public transportation. But we are saying like, around close to half, right? 44%, like 44% of them, they're saying that they might not be comfortable using public transportation in 2020. Restaurant, yes, there is a lot more people comfortable going to restaurants or visit family and friends and stuff. But as you said, if you are in the if you are a fitness first or celebrity fitness and all those gyms and health clubs, they needs to be worried. And if you are Air Asia and traveling, they should also be concerned. There is this thing. So this is also part psychological part of it, that people needs to be comfortable, the safety and health. So some of our study indicate that people now give more importance to safety and health of the facilities that they are visiting. So that's probably to give them that confidence that they won't be infected by traveling or visiting a restaurant, is something becomes as much as part of boosting the economic recovery, right? So, and as you yeah.
We'll take a short break, Arun. When we come back, we'll continue on this conversation, particularly on the psychological aspect. For you guys there, don't worry, we'll come back as soon as possible. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Notepad. The conversation continues on how Malaysia is getting ready to restart our economy and restarting our lives, generally speaking. And Ipsos has basically quantified the whole receptiveness of Malaysians on returning back to the economy and returning back to work and trying to bring some sort of normalcy into our lives. And it's not just that, they benchmark this particular behavior against all our neighbours in and across the Southeast Asian region. And we've spent quite a bit talking about the report per se. I want to talk a little bit more about the subjectivity and the, I guess, the perceptiveness of humans in the psychological aspect of returning back to normalcy. Joining me in this conversation, of course, is Arun Menon of Ipsos. Arun, let's talk a little bit about the psychology of the consumers and the psychology of people like you and me in trying to return back to normalcy. Because before we went to the break, you touched a bit on the conversation of how it's actually more of a psychological aspect. And I agree with you fully. It is plenty of things to do with the psychology aspect. How do you think governments and businesses can bridge that gap of the consumer psychological aspect of returning back to normalcy and try to ease back into that whole normalcy or the new normal that we speak of all the time?
Yeah. So one of the things that what we've been telling is that there is the old normal, there is an in-between phase, and there is a new normal, right? So what we understand, this phase is the in-between phase. This is a phase that we are adapting back to the new normal, right? So we shouldn't misinterpret this phase as the new normal. So because we are on a day-to-day basis, people are adjusting or adapting, as in the case of Malaysia, right? 35% of them, they are actually still thinking of adapting or reacting onto the day-to-day basis. So there are some things which we learn as we have learned over the period of times, like as we were saying in the work from home, is it going to be something part of our new normal in itself? Because partly companies also identify the benefit of work from home. One of the challenge that they face is that how do we manage productivity? How do we manage employee engagement during this phases as such? And during the 3 months has been 2 months to 3 months has been a phase through which companies could adapt to it, right? So after we get out and whenever people come back to the normal, it becomes already a new normal. People encourage now, the businesses encourage people to work from home wherever they can and as it is, right? But we also need to see that back to office or back to the social spaces, right? Or back to the economic space, also linked to different group of people, right? So if I am someone who has like an old age parent with staying with me, or I have younger kids staying with me, I will react very differently than to someone who's a teenager who is staying alone, or staying with his or her wife, or those kind of groups. So each groups is reacting very differently. And also we see the urban versus rural areas. There's a lot of engagement in that space in itself. So there are some spaces, like one of the things which we see is going to be part of along from work from home is going to be our use of digital space, or our use of e-commerce, and those habits are going to stick for a longer period of time, right? So we have noticed a lot of people who were not comfortable using online channels to do banking, do e-commerce purchase and everything, has actually started using during this period, and they will continue to sit. So in my discussion with some of the people in the banking industry, says that those people who used to sit on the fence now actually started using online channel. And going forward, we also see that I'm not going to wait outside the bank for the health and safety reasons for a long queue. I would rather use the online channel per se, right? So those have already becomes part of our new behavior in itself, right? And one of the things which I heard from my colleagues in some of the other regions outside of Asia Pacific, having a face mask has become a bit of a trend even before the COVID-19. We've been following that the movie trends from Korea, or the drama trends from some of the other regions, and a lot of people were using mask in one way or other. And for Malaysians or the region to adapt, it was quite easy compared to my colleagues in Europe, or our peers in US as such. That's very strange to them, right? So masks comes naturally. And unfortunately or fortunately, the health situation in Malaysia also made us very aware of mask and how it can help as such, all those things. So that becomes, again, that's a habit we picked up quite easily, and we will probably stay it for a while with us, and because we have different reasons to do it, right? So each of this going to be a different angle to it, each of this but going for a sports, for a football match, or going to a gym, where I am engaging with a wider group of public places, is where it's going to be a bit more challenge. So one of the psychological factor which was quite interesting to me was that people has no problem of actually visiting a friend's or colleague's home at this point of time, or probably going out for restaurants, but they are much uncomfortable going to a building where there's a lot of people. That is like work office space where you have hundreds or 200s of people, or probably to a school where there's a lot of kids who is there is a lot more resistance or psychological anxiety for going to a larger group. So we now prefer to hang out is probably much smaller group of like 1 or 2 people than hanging out with 10, 20 or 30 people, because of definitely because of the psychological health aspect, right? So you don't know what was the history, or or exposure of all the people whom you are meeting. So that kind of that part of our psychology is going to stay more. So our boardrooms or meeting rooms, or our birthday parties are going to be not as crowded as it used to be for a long time to come.
Arun, I want to talk a little bit about Ipsos Malaysia as a company. How's it like there? Are you advising your colleagues here in the country to work from home? Are you guys returning back to office? Just want to learn a little bit more about the company that you work at. How are things there?
So we had 2 sides of our business, which is like we have around 450 of our employees based in our Mid Valley office. So that's 2 to 3 floors of the building occupied, and we have also a field presence who collect the data outside, right? So one of the things when the COVID-19 happened, and we moved before the lockdown to ask people to start work from home, or see some of the activities as such, because our people who are on the field collecting the data had a higher exposure to COVID-19. So that was the first thing which we were concerned about. Then imagine like one person coming to office with infection, then you are infecting probably 450 people, right? So we took, like, before the Prime Minister has announced the lockdown, few days before itself, we have decided to ask people to work from home, because if you are, a lot of people use public transportation, and there is a risk of that exposure as well. So and then we ask all our employees to move to office and move to home. Part of it is also, we were quite fortunate to have a digital online survey platforms and stuff, so we could move part of our business. We are definitely affected as in all other businesses in Malaysia, but we have that digital online presence which actually helped us to transition our business faster. So COVID-19 has been a bit catalyst for our industry as well, of transition of surveys or data collection, or the interviews which happens through online now, through video calls and stuff like that. So that kind of a business transition which is going to stay. Now then there is a period where all of my colleagues, including myself, has been adapting to the COVID-19. Then comes the current phase where we now pulling people back to office, right? Now ask people to work from office, but at the same time at a pace which is comfortable to them. There are people with the same representation of population is in, there are colleagues with kids, at below 10, and people with respiratory issues and stuff like that. So we want to leave it to them in terms of coming back to office. And those who are visiting to the office, they have to follow a set of standard procedures, as in the sense that they shouldn't be sitting close to each other. There is enough space between seats, and of wearing the masks in the office, and using the hand sanitizers and the usual stuff. And we also based in a shopping mall. We are based in Mid Valley, so there is a risk of exposure in a wider public spaces as well. So we need to be careful about that as well, right? So now we are on a phase where, how do we make it comfortable, as we mentioned, for our employees to come back to office as and when they need to be, and work from home. So it's what we call a set of confidence building measures for our employees to be back in office. And I believe that should be there for the society at large, and for the wider economic activity to resume as well.
Fantastic. Arun, I am very happy with this conversation. I really do want to speak to you in person, hopefully soon enough. But for now, we have to draw this conversation to a close. I wish you and the Ipsos family all the best. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad over there. Plenty of interviews like this will be found there. Until then, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.